Taking a story from pen to paper to picture can be challenging, but with a lot of hard work, the final product can be a wonderful visual experience. It's really cool to see our favorite comics and cartoons come to real life, especially now that CGI and video editing have advanced so much. Where it gets interesting, however, is when it kind of goes off the rails. So today, we're going to talk about live action adaptations that are interesting for many reasons, not just for being accurate. Being that Spider-Man is a lot of people's favorite superhero, mine included, it's safe to say that any sort of adaptation of the wall crawler story would get some attention. If you can think of it, Spidey's probably done it. Movies, cartoons, video games, theme park rides, and obviously live action. The most interesting of the live action adaptations has to be the Japanese Spider-Man show from the late 1970s, also known as Spider-Man. Marvel wasn't really doing a lot of business in Japan before this time, which seemed to puzzle company executive Gene Pelk, who had family ties to Japan. Pelk would meet with then-president of the Toei Film Company, Yoshinori Watanabe, and work out a 3-year agreement to produce a Spider-Man live-action show. Because of the differences between the Japanese and Western markets, the story of Spider-Man would go through a few changes. Peter Parker would become Takuya Yamashiro, and the Sinister Six would be replaced by the Iron Cross Army, an alien fighting force hell-bent on taking over the galaxy. Takuya would also get his own Uncle Ben-type motivation when his dad, Dr. Hiroshi, would get killed by the Iron Cross Army. Takuya discovers his dad's body but has to flee the Iron Cross Army and runs into another alien named Garia. Garia plays the role of the radioactive spider. He's a dying soldier from planet Spider, which is another alien planet that got attacked by the Iron Cross Army. Obviously wanting revenge before he dies, Garia injects Takuya with his blood, and now Takuya has spider powers. Garia also gives him his spider bracelet, which contains the spider suit and a few other gadgets that we'll talk about a little bit later. Because Spider-Man is obviously directed towards children, so too was the live-action show. Toei was known for producing tokusatsu, or special filming shows, which involved a lot of stunt work and man-made special effects. However, the budget wasn't exactly large, so the production company had to take a few shortcuts. According to actor Shinji Todo, who played Takuya Yamashiro, they would shoot 2 episodes a week during production. That's a lot considering the series ran for about 41 episodes between May 1978 and March 1979. With such a packed schedule and not a lot of wiggle room, the production team would have to get pretty creative when filming. Although Spider-Man takes place in New York City, Spider-Man has many of its scenes in abandoned work sites or in big forests. This was because a lot of the scenes needed explosives, and shooting this stuff in cities would cause a lot of issues with law enforcement. It was also cheaper to shoot outside of Tokyo because of the limited budget for children's shows. A lot of the stunt coordination was done on set because of the time crunch too. Hifumi Koga, the stuntman Spider-Man, say that 10 times fast, explained that his only protection was a rope tied around him for car chases, flips, and wall crawling. At other times, he was expected to fly into trees or avoid hazards like dogs and explosives, usually getting injured more often than not. Probably the most ridiculous stunt was when Spider-Man climbed a massive radio tower for the intro. Koga apparently free climbed the tower, again with just a rope for security. Yeah, that's not exactly safe. The most infamous thing about Spider-Man isn't even the stunts though. Toei wanted merchandise to be able to market to the Japanese audience, like toys, and needed something a little more extreme than Spider-Man. They decided to borrow some ideas from some of their other genres like kaiju and mecha shows. In the show's storyline, Garia, who's the dying soldier with the blood, flies to Earth to escape the Iron Cross Army and crashes his spaceship, the Marveler. The spider bracelet he gives Takuya has the ability to summon the Marveler, as well as a few other things. The first thing is the GP7. It's a flying car that can also shoot missiles and is usually the first thing Takuya will use if a fight gets a little bit dicey. Once this happens, the Iron Cross Army will transform one of their alien abominations into a giant kaiju monster ready to kill Spider-Man. Takuya will then call the Marveler, and the GP7 will dock back into the spaceship and transform into a giant mech robot known as Leopardon. That's right, Spider-Man has his own Megazord! Leopardon and the kaiju monster will fight, and it usually ends with Leopardon busting out his spider slash and defeating the monster. Obviously, a super cool transforming robot is, well, cool, and though the show didn't do amazingly, the toys sold really well. There's also a rumor that the footage from Leopardon was reused over and over because the prop suit was stolen from set. It was also said the stunt actors who had to be inside the Leopardon suit found it kind of hard to move around, which limited their mobility, and that sort of limits what sort of, stunt work or shots you can get out of the suit. In any case, Leopardon's inclusion and marketing success would lead Toei to include more mecha elements in their other tokusatsu series, like Super Sentai, which would eventually lead to the Power Rangers. So essentially, the reason you have Mighty Morphin Power Rangers today is because of Spider-Man, which is pretty damn cool. From renting DVDs through the mail to one of the biggest streaming services in the world, Netflix has grown and adapted with consumer trends and viewing habits. With such a large subscriber base, it can license popular shows to increase revenue and attract new customers. But why do that when you can just make the content yourself? Netflix has had success with a lot of original concepts like Outer Banks and The Circle, but when it comes to adapting other stories, it's been kind of hit or miss. The term adaptation doesn't always mean stick to the original story, but that creative choice is not always the best idea. The Netflix series Glow is a really good example of doing this well. While it's not always 100% historically accurate, it does a really good job of trying to recreate the feeling of the original women's wrestling promotion, and how different it was compared to more mainstream companies like the WWF and the NWA. It blends fact and fiction well, and is appreciated by many fans in the wrestling community. But not all fan communities are the same, and some fans would argue that Netflix adapting their favorite shows is a bad idea. Namely, anime and manga fans. Unlike Glow, a lot of manga and anime are usually fictional, so it's a bit harder to blend with reality. CGI can only do so much to replicate some of the special effects that are imagined by mangaka and the animation studios. And although Netflix is well known for licensing anime, some of their picks for exclusive streaming have definitely had some issues. That's not to say it's all bad, like The Great Pretender is really well done, but it does give Netflix a little less room to make mistakes. To show the difference between this hit-or-miss phenomenon, let's examine two different manga-adapted movies that premiered on Netflix: the 2017 Death Note movie and the 2018 Bleach movie. Death Note was originally going to be produced by Warner Brothers as a retelling of the original story, but after some cost-cutting, Netflix would eventually pick up the concept and start production in June of 2016. Right away, it was criticized for whitewashing, essentially casting American actors to play Japanese characters, a practice also criticized in other anime adaptations like Ghost in the Shell. To combat this, the story was changed around, now being based in America over Japan. Light Yagami would become Light Turner, and Misa Amane would become Mia Sutton. Some characters and concepts stayed the same, like Ryuk, L, and the Death Note, but the end product wound up feeling melodramatic and rushed, rather than being more of a psychological thriller. Also, during the film, there's a train crash orchestrated by Light that apparently used footage of an actual accident in Belgium where 19 people were killed. I'm not sure as to how that would have passed quality control by Netflix, but it just dampens any sort of effort made by the production to tell the story. Now, the Bleach film was a different kind of beast. It was actually produced by Warner Brothers Japan this time and involved original author Taito Kubo from the beginning of production. Netflix would license the movie and dub it into other languages. Fun fact, Johnny Young Bosch, who actually played main character Ichigo Kurosaki in the English anime dub, reprised his role for the Netflix English dub as well. Much like the anime episodes on Netflix, the movie ends prematurely, basing the plot around the first big fight between Ichigo and the Hollow known as Grand Fisher. Other characters like Renji Abarai, Byakuya, and Rukia Kuchiki really only had some minor roles in the movie. As a Bleach fan, I do think this fight with Grand Fisher is important to Ichigo's development. Fleshing it out was really cool. I just feel like the drama with the Soul Society arc would have been really cool to put into live action, especially with all the fights and plot twists. It may have also led to a sequel movie if they had done it that way, but maybe that's just my opinion. I think Netflix does well in supporting and bringing films to a wider audience, but can drop the ball sometimes when it comes to adapting stories on their own. Instead, you could just watch the anime these movies are trying to adapt. There's something different about a story being told in a musical form. Having worked in live production alongside a lot of theater technicians and knowing a lot of the effort put into these shows, I can really appreciate musicals as an art form even if I'm not drawn to them personally. A combination of singing, dancing, and acting attracts many people to these performances. A great example is the popularity of Hamilton, both on Broadway and streaming on Disney+. The Japanese are obviously no strangers to live performance, having their own styles evolve throughout the centuries. They also have their own way of making musicals. What fascinates me though is the sheer number of manga and anime-based musicals, both in Japan and abroad. There seems to be a stark difference in deciding which series gets adapted into musicals based on the region. Although it's not as prevalent when an anime or manga gets adapted into a musical in the West, it's usually more so a kids series. The Chadtronic video on the Pokemon Live Tour definitely showcases how the musical, despite having lots of work done with the production in terms of music and set props, was really just focused on selling more Pokemon merch. Unfortunately, there's no Digimon counterpart, although there's a very enthusiastic fan-made crossover musical with Disney characters. Sailor Moon, a very popular choice for Japanese musicals, was slated to be performed in New York and Washington, D.C., but there's not much footage aside from a promo trailer. In Japan, most of these musicals are referred to as 2.5D musicals. They even have their own organization, the Japan 2.5D Musical Association, that catalogs and promotes productions. According to the association, any sort of theatrical play that balances 2D, the realm of manga, animation, and video games, and 3D, the realm of the theater, can be considered a 2.5D musical. And oh boy, are they popular. Now, if you have a really popular series, you're probably going to have multiple showings and adaptations over many years, even years after the series ended. Like, there's a bajillion Sailor Moon musicals in Japan. Why? I don't know, but it's kind of cool. What's more interesting though is even seeing like niche manga, anime, or video games get their own 2.5D musical. One of my personal favorite series, the Ace Attorney games, started to get more and more popular as the original trilogy was ported from the Game Boy Advance to the Nintendo DS, and it wound up inspiring its own musical trilogy too. Another cool thing is seeing something like Air Gear that sort of deals with cool rollerblading tricks, having its own musical on wheels. It's so weirdly fascinating, but because the budgets aren't always, top tier, it seems there's less of a financial hurdle to use different properties, and that seems to bode well for anime musicals. Maybe we'll do like a bigger deep dive into this genre if you're more interested. Just let us know. Licensed video games based on movies, based on video games, and sometimes other properties that already have video games. Licensed video games have always varied in quality, especially movie-based games. If you're in the store and you see a game based on a movie you like, you're inclined to pick it up because it's based on something you like. Usually they're made to cash in on the popularity of a theatrical release, although there's been times where a movie has been licensed for a video game way after it's been on home video, like the Godfather video games. In a similar vein, movies based on video games tend to vary in quality as well. You're either going to stay very accurate to the source material, make something original that's enjoyed by fans, or in most cases, just make something that's inaccurate and very hard to follow. Video game movies are meant to pull in cash in two ways. Get fans of the series to watch the movie and get other people to buy the video games. So why on earth would you make a licensed game based on the movie? It just seems pedantic. There's no Sonic the Hedgehog, the movie, the video game, because they didn't want more backlash than they already had, and they also realized that there's dozens and dozens of Sonic games for people to already play. Unless it's going to be 100% faithful to the source material, which almost always never happens with these games. Making a licensed video game when there's already video games based on the same property is just a bad idea. Two of the biggest offenders come to mind instantly: Street Fighter 1994 and Dragon Ball Evolution. I get that I said video game, movie, video games, say that 10 times fast, but I feel like Dragon Ball Evolution falls into its own weird category. Dragon Ball has already had tons of licensed games like Dragon Ball FighterZ, Dragon Ball Budokai, Dokkan Battle, the weird card game on Game Boy Advance, Legacy of Goku. So the cash grabbiness of Dragon Ball Evolution on PSP is really on full display. I remember seeing this game when I was younger in the grocery store, which is a very odd thing to say, but I wasn't really a Dragon Ball fan, so I didn't pay too much attention to it. But now that I've seen the gameplay, it's somehow worse. It's like a shovelware version of the Budokai games. And for some reason, Gohan is Goku's grandfather.
You serious?
I don't even watch this series, and even I know that Gohan is Goku's kid. Like, how do you just mess that up? In any case, if the movie does poorly, maybe just try not killing the goodwill of the fans any further with a really bad PSP game. As for Street Fighter 1994, it tried to bring the fighters of the World Warrior tournament into real life, and it did pretty well at the box office, making its budget 3 times over. It's not exactly aged well, but at least you get Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile, which is sort of a bonus. What's interesting about its spin-off game is not only was Street Fighter the movie, the video game, released on home consoles, you could also play it in the arcades. Many of the actors from the movie were actually used in the video game. They were captured frame by frame to recreate their movements, and those images were then digitized into sprites for the game. This may sound a bit familiar, and if you're thinking it, you're probably right. The Street Fighter movie video game is more like Mortal Kombat than Street Fighter. This may be a worse offender than Dragon Ball Evolution. Why would you play this over any other Street Fighter arcade cabinet? And 2, if you're a Street Fighter fan, why would you play this at all? And if you're a Mortal Kombat fan, why would you play this over Mortal Kombat? It makes no sense. It was a weird move, and the fact that Capcom hasn't remastered or re-released the game just indicates that no one wants to remember this. Most of the time, it's just better to avoid licensed video games, and if there's one that's really good, honestly, there's gonna be a YouTuber that just makes a video about it. Anyway, that's it from us. Thanks so much for tuning into The Scent. Let us know if you want to hear more about anything we talked about today, and maybe we'll do a bit more of a deep dive. Catch you later.